My wife and I were making our way back home, huddling under one umbrella, trying to shield ourselves from the relentless downpour. The constant platter of raindrops on concrete was the only sound in the deserted streets. We walked with only a few feet in front of us visible. We had a feeling that the environment was encroaching on us because the rain's haze had clouded our vision. We were soaked and miserable and wanted nothing more than to get back to the warmth of our sweet little house. It happened after that. A frantic cry for help pierced the unsettling silence. Its echo through the drizzly streets sent shivers down our spines. We froze as that voice's urgency pierced the chilly, damp atmosphere. We exchanged nervous glances with each other before starting to follow the sound, allowing our feelings to override our better judgment. We looked through the alleyways as the voice drew closer and closer. The voice was so full of pain, fear, and desperation that we could not ignore it. A wet, shaking man on the ground finally appeared. We hurried to assist without thinking about what we were about to do. In addition to having ripped clothing and facial bruising, the man who was lying on the ground was in bad condition. A mixture of blood and rainwater ran down his cheek. He gasped in a whisper.
"He's still out there. Please help me. He's still out there."
In order to understand about who he was talking, we ran out of time. We helped the hurt man get to his feet despite the torrential downpour. We hastily made the decision to take him to the station so that the police could deal with this situation. But as we started to go back through the murky maze, a figure in the darkness materialized from the shadows and loomed over us. There was a man there. He had wild eyes, matted, tangled hair, and a maniacal grin that made us shiver. He suddenly lunged at us, his movements unpredictable and erratic. We hardly had time to reply. Fear coursed through us as we fought this insane stranger, and the rain made the ground beneath us a perilous battleground. The constant rain muffled my wife's cries for help as she yelled in pain. I had to fight to keep the psychopath in control because of some abhorrent madness that gave him strength. We were merely regular people who had found ourselves in an unfathomable nightmare. In that awful circumstance, survival instinct took charge. I pushed the man away with all the strength I could muster, feeling the rush of adrenaline. When he fell back, my wife and I seized the opportunity to run away, grabbing the hurt man and running as quickly as our shaking legs could carry us. The psychopath followed us relentlessly, his manic laughter echoing in the drizzly streets. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, as the fear and the mayhem that were growing in the never-ending downpour. Running through the tight lanes, our hearts were pounding as we gasped for air. Finally, we caught sight of the welcoming glow of the police station up ahead. We ran in its directions, our legs heaving and our clothing clinging to our bodies. The on-duty policeman heard our cries for help as soon as we smashed through the doors and responded quickly. Before the insane attacker could harm anyone else, they ran outside and grabbed him. He was a patient who had broken free from a mental hospital, his mind fractured and lost in the depths of madness. The police, who appeared stern but were simultaneously relieved and worried, managed to apprehend him. As they led the psychopath away in handcuffs, his eyes locked onto mine and he grinned menacingly despite being apprehended. In a chilling way, it brought back to mind the horrors we had just experienced that rainy night. Police interviewed the injured man and pledged to take all necessary safety measures while also recording his statement. That terrifying incident, a rainy night that had turned into a terrifying run-in with madness, would never leave us. Shaken, drenched, and with our hearts pounding, we made it home. The rain outside was never ending, a constant reminder of the horrors we had endured. As we huddled together in the warmth and security of our home, we couldn't help but be grateful that we had survived the terror that had occurred on that rainy night. Hey everyone, if you liked the video so far, please like, subscribe, and comment so I can keep making these videos for you. Thank you so much. It was a stormy night, the kind that makes you want to curl up under your covers and hope for an early sunrise. The TV was a flickering diversion from the non-stop rain outside while I was home alone. When the clock struck 12, everything became quieter and eerier. My door received a tremulous, faint knock at that precise moment. My heart was beating like a drum in my chest as I froze. My stomach churned with unease as I tiptoed to the door, wondering who could be visiting at this hour, in this weather. I peered through the peephole, and what I saw made me shudder. A kid, a young boy, no older than 5, who was drenched from head to toe and quivering like a leaf in the wind. I was unable to look away from the desperate plea in his eyes. I cautiously unlocked the door and carefully cracked it open while swallowing my fear. I asked, trying not to stutter, "What's wrong, little guy?" He raised his head to face me while crying,
Mister, can you help me? It's freezing outside. I'm lost.
He tugged at my heartstrings, and I was powerless to reject him. I quickly opened the door wider and let him in. Raindrops formed puddles on my hardwood floor as they dripped from his frail frame. In an effort to help the scared child, I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around him. I heard rustling in the nearby bushes as I was crouching next to him. I instinctively turned to look when panic struck. A tall, soggy, sinister figure emerged from the darkness. He looked at me with icy, cunning eyes. Prior to my response, I lunged for the door and attempted to slam it. Fear swept through me, and I slammed the door with all my might, avoiding his grasp just barely, but he was able to put his foot between it just in time. The boy screamed in fear as the man's fingers touched the edge of the door. My insight struck me like a bolt of lightning. The man had lured the boy into my house using him as bait. My thoughts were racing, and I was aware that I had to take all reasonable precautions to keep the boy safe. I yelled, looking into the child's eyes and saying,
Run to the living room and hide.
I pushed against the door with everything I had because adrenaline was pumping through my body. The man outside continued to slam the wood and shout foul language. As I fought to stay in control, sweat started to run down my face. I managed to slam the door shut with one final push, just as the man's fingers began to tremble from my growing level of desperation. I slid the door shut with trembling hands as my heart was thumping in my chest. Up until now, I had been secure. I turned to the terrified child who was hiding in the living room as the threat from outside had momentarily subsided. Holding him close, I tried to calm him, but my heart was still pounding. My voice trembled as I described my terrifying experience to the 911 operator. The man had disappeared into the night by the time the police showed up, leaving only the echoes of his heinous deeds. They took the child into their care and assured him of his safety. I couldn't help but feel the chilling knowledge that I had narrowly avoided a horrible fate as the rain started to pour more heavily outside. That night, I couldn't fall asleep because I kept hearing those ominous knocks. It seemed to be raining harder and the shadows were darker. The rain was pelting my windshield with great force as I was traveling down a deserted country road. Even though the wipers were working non-stop, it seemed as though the downpour was barely keeping up. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the trees that stood guard along the road like gnarled sentinels. My internal unease was echoed by the distant clap of thunder. I had traveled this path 100 times before, but the night was unique. The rain seemed to wash away all sense of familiarity, leaving only a sense of loneliness and dread. The only means of communication I had with the outside world in this desolate place was my radio and its trembling static. A pair of dim headlights that were flickering like a dying ember appeared then in the distance. I could see the outline of a car whose hazard lights were frantically blinking as I drew nearer. The vehicle was immobilized, drenched in water, and deserted. My initial reaction was to pretend I hadn't seen anything and continue on the road, but I was unable to withstand the pressure of duty or perhaps just curiosity. As soon as I exited my car and parked next to the stranded vehicle, the rain began to fall. My heart was beating like a drum as I moved slowly. A man in second skin-like clothing stood by the car. As I got closer, rivulets of rain started to fall, and he looked up. I yelled, barely audible above the relentless downpour,
"Hey, you need some help?"
The man nodded, looking relieved.
"Yes, I've been having trouble getting my car started. Thank you in advance if you can assist."
I paused because I thought it would be best to proceed with caution. He seemed sincere enough, though, so I couldn't just abandon him in the drenching rain. I approached the vehicle and inquired as to what appeared to be wrong. He was about to reply when I heard someone approaching me. I turned around and saw two more men coming out of the shadows. Their hoods had been pulled lower over their brows, covering their faces. I took a step back after experiencing a wave of panic that felt like lightning. The man standing by the car grinned with a menacing glint in his eyes.
"It seems that we have a good boy here,"
he said. As I came to the realization that I had walked right into a trap, my heart began to beat rapidly with fear. These men had bad intentions toward me. I was certain of that. I turned and hurried back to my car because the rain was making the ground slick. I searched for my keys and struggled to get the door open. The men were getting closer, and I could hear their footsteps growing louder. I heard one of them yell,
"Get him!"
just as I flung open the door and jumped inside. I closed the door and exert all of my energy into pressing the gas. As I moved quickly on the slick pavement, my tires began to squeal. I could see the men chasing after me in my rearview mirror, but visibility had decreased due to the storm. I eventually found safety in a gas station's fluorescent lights, a beacon of hope after what felt like an eternity. I drove up to the store, stumbled inside while still dizzy, and gasped out the tale to the bewildered employee. His call was promptly returned and the police arrived. I sat in the dry, warm gas station, wrapped in a scratchy blanket as I observed the officers taking my statement. Later, when I caught the news on the TV in the corner, I finally understood the full horror of what I had just barely avoided. The hoodlums who had tried to attack me weren't just any hoodlums. They were part of a gang of armed robbers who had been terrorizing the neighborhood. One of them pretended that his car was broken down so they could catch me in their trap and rob me, or worse. When I realized how dangerously close I had been to becoming a victim of their crime wave, my heart sank. So there I was, finishing a late-night shift at work, trudging my way home on a dark, rainy night. The relentless rain poured on my umbrella like an eerie symphony. When I got home, all I wanted to do was curl up in my bed and forget about the outside world. I was strolling through these dark, scary alleyways where the only light came from the sputtering street lamps. Aside from the squishy sound of my feet on the wet pavement, everything was silent due to the rain. A terrifying, piercing scream then hit me like a bolt of lightning. For a split second, I thought about fleeing the situation as my heart skipped a beat. In the end, who wants to cause trouble on a night like this? But something inside of me kept bugging at me, forcing me to look into what was going on. Screams like that shouldn't be ignored, especially in an alley. So, against my better judgment, I ran in the direction of the scream. With each step, the screams got louder, like a nightmare coming true. I didn't give a damn that it was raining buckets. I had to be aware of what was occurring. A man and a woman were lying on the ground, with the man on top of the woman and his hands around her neck when I first saw them. She was frozen, her terrified eyes wide. I couldn't sleep at night because of that sight. Pure adrenaline drove my actions as instinct took over, and I lunged at the man and yanked him away from her. He stumbled back, surprised and rage visible in his eyes. He was obviously out of control, so I knew I needed to proceed with caution. I stood there as a human barrier between the woman and the psychopath as she grasped for air and her body shook. I roared at him in a voice that was equal parts terror and rage.
"Get out of here! Leave her alone!" I said.
Thankfully, he disappeared into the night, getting soaked. She was frightened and in tatters, so I helped her to her feet. She had undoubtedly experienced hell. My heart was still thumping like a jackhammer as I asked her what happened. Tears welled up in her eyes as she paused. Finally, she muttered,
"He's my husband. He snapped because he believed I was cheating on him. He wanted to harm me very badly."
Her plight broke my heart. Such suffering is unacceptable. She shook her head when I offered to take her to the police to make sure she was safe. She was afraid of her husband finding out that she had called the police and of what he might do. All I could do at that point was direct her to a nearby cafe where she could find refuge from the rain and gather her thoughts. I left her there in the hopes that one day she would gather the courage to leave that terrible relationship behind. That gloomy, rainy night, I was strolling down the empty street. Overhead, the ominous clouds loomed, ready to drench me at any second. The only sound in the streets was a distant thunderclap. I sped up as the first raindrops splattered on the ground in an effort to get inside my house before the rain started seriously. I was completely soaked as the raindrops grew bigger and more persistent. When panic struck, I started running. But because I was moving quickly, I missed the dangerous pit that was in my way. I fell to the ground with mud and water splashing all around me after my foot caught the edge. I yelled in agony as my body began to hurt from the fall. I then noticed him. A shady figure emerged from the shadows. He came over and offered me a helping hand while displaying a worried expression. I gratefully accepted it and struggled to stand up. My heart was still racing from the fall as I gave him a sincere thank you. As I carried on, I had the sinking feeling that something wasn't right. The pocket where my wallet should have been was the first place my hand naturally went. I frantically searched all of my pockets as panic shot through me, but my wallet was nowhere to be found. I abruptly turned around in the vain hope that I had lost it in my fall. A sinking sensation, however, overcame me when I saw the man who had assisted me. I understood he had stolen it. I yelled, my voice shaking with rage and terror.
"Hey! I want my money and my wallet back, please!"
He hesitated while smiling. He replied coolly.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I was unable to let him off the hook for this. When my rage reached a boiling point, I resolutely went to him. I attempted to check his pockets, but he violently pushed me away. I stumbled backward, barely managing to maintain my balance. After confessing his deception, a shady grin appeared on his face. He scoffed.
All right, fine. I stole your wallet, and I'm not giving it back.
He was making fun of me, and I was enraged. I clenched my fists and prepared to fight back if necessary, but he was more powerful than I had anticipated. He struck me with a single, powerful blow that left me reeling. Ineffectively, I attempted to fight back. He persisted and easily defeated me. He kept pounding me, and my vision became foggy. You had to be more cautious, he said in a cruel moment of candor as he leaned in close. He then abruptly left me, battered and bruised, out in the drenching rain. He carried my wallet and my money as I helplessly watched him vanish into the night. I was lying there on the soggy pavement, the rain erasing any traces of the violent encounter. It was a nightmare turn of events that happened so suddenly, leaving me not only emotionally, but also physically scarred. A cold-blooded observer of the horror of that rainy night, the rain kept on falling.